Let's dive into the 2024 Senate map with my near final predictions for each race. The latest forecast places the Republican Party's chances of flipping the Senate majority at 88% due to the massive fundamental advantage they enjoy on this map of the 34 races up for election. Democrats are defending 23, including a majority of the competitive races. Meanwhile, according to the Senate control market, Republican odds have risen to their highest mark yet, translating to a 75 to 80% probability of gaining control. I like to look at both quantitative forecasts and prediction market odds, as they often provide unique insights that complement one another. For anyone interested, I'll include links to both resources in the description below. Now let's walk through each race and start filling out the map with solid seats that neither party will have to bat an eyelid on. Generally speaking, safe states are those I expect either party will carry by a double-digit margin, and I am at least 95% confident the candidate representing that party on the ballot will win. Starting with the safe Democrat states, down the Pacific Coast we have Washington, where four-term Democrat Maria Cantwell is running for re-election. She was most recently re-elected in 2018 with 58% of the votes. The deep blue state of Washington hasn't elected a Republican to the Senate since 1994, and it voted for Joe Biden by 19 points in the 2020 presidential race. In California, longtime incumbent Democrat Dianne Feinstein passed away last October, and Lefa Butler was appointed to replace her. Butler opted against running for a full term as several notable Democratic U.S. representatives had already entered the race to succeed Feinstein. LA area Congressman Adam Schiff advanced to the general election via the nonpartisan primary held on Super Tuesday, beating out Congresswoman Katie Porter and Barbara Lee. He'll face Republican Steve Garvey, a former LA Dodger, in what should be an easy win for Schiff. California voted for Biden by 29 points in 2020, and Schiff has led in every single poll by at least 15 points. As for Hawaii, incumbent Democrat Mazi Hirono is seeking a third term. She was re-elected in 2018 with 71% of the votes, the largest share for a candidate in either party in that cycle. Now to New Mexico, another solid blue seat. Two-term Democrat Martin Heinrich was re-elected in 2018 with 54% of the vote in a three-candidate race. Heinrich is now running for a third term 4 years after Biden comfortably won New Mexico by 11 points. The polling average here shows Heinrich with a strong advantage, sitting at exactly 10 points right now. In Minnesota, a relatively competitive state in presidential elections, the latest poll average has the vice president leading by less than 5 points on average. However, Democrats have no reason to worry about the Senate race with three-term incumbent Amy Klobuchar on the ballot. She was re-elected in 2018 with 60% of the vote and has won each of her previous Senate contests by more than 20 percentage points. Minnesota is solid blue on our map. A similar story in Virginia, a peripheral battleground state on the presidential map. The Senate race is safe blue as two-term incumbent Senator Tim Kaine has led in every single poll by a comfortable margin, with his average lead currently sitting at 12.2%. You may remember Kaine as Hillary Clinton's running mate back in 2016. He was re-elected in 2018 with 57% of the vote. Democrats will also hold a bunch of states up here in the Northeast, starting in New York, where incumbent Democrat Kirsten Gillibrand is running for a third full term. She was most recently re-elected in 2018 with 67% of the vote. New York Republicans nominated NYPD Detective Mike Sopran as their candidate to challenge Gillibrand, and while there is substantial evidence to suggest New York will trend right this cycle, he will still be facing a serious uphill battle in this Biden plus 23 state. In Vermont and Massachusetts, the two bluest states in the nation, in 2020, where Biden won by 35 and 33 points respectively, we have two of his Democratic challengers from that primary. Independent Bernie Sanders, who caucuses with the Democrats, and Elizabeth Warren. Both are expected to easily hold their seats and keep these states firmly blue in November. Then in Rhode Island and Connecticut, both states also have three-term incumbents running for re-election, Sheldon Whitehouse and Chris Murphy. They were both re-elected in 2018 by greater than 20-point margins, and Harris should win both of these states comfortably as well. Closing out the New England region, up in Maine, two-term incumbent Angus King is one of the most popular senators in the country. Like Bernie Sanders, he is an independent who caucuses with Democrats, so this goes down as a quasi-hold for the party. Finally, moving down to the Mid-Atlantic region, starting in New Jersey, Incumbent Democrat Bob Menendez is facing corruption charges, and the Democratic nominee, Congressman Andy Kim, is heavily favored to succeed him. New Jersey voted for Biden by 16 points in 2020, and Kim is a relatively popular candidate. In Delaware, incumbent Democrat Tom Carper is retiring, but unlike its neighbor to the east, Republicans don't have a big-name candidate to challenge Delaware's lone U.S. Representative, Lisa Blunt Rochester, as she ascends to the Senate in Biden's home state. Finally, Maryland has shifted back into the safe column. For Democrats, it's one of the bluest states in the nation, as it voted for Biden by 33 percentage points in 2020, his third-best performance in the country. It has not elected a Republican to the Senate in more than 40 years. However, with Democratic Senator Ben Cardin retiring and Republicans nominating former Governor Larry Hogan, the race has received more attention than it should have. Hogan won 2 statewide elections as a Republican in Maryland and left office in 2023 as one of the most popular governors in the country, with a near 80% approval rating. This is practically unheard of in today's environment, and a big reason why his entry into the race forced Democrats to spend time and money here. Their nominee, Angela Alsobrooks, is neither a strong nor weak candidate per se, and the polls now show her leading by a solid margin of 11.3% per Real Clear Politics average. Hogan is facing near impossible odds here in a state that Trump will probably lose by around 30 points. With those 15 Democratic holds on the board, the party total has been lifted to 43 seats. That's 7 seats short of the minimum required to maintain their majority, assuming Kamala Harris wins the presidency and her running mate Tim Walz retains the tie-breaking vote she currently wields. However, if Trump wins, Democrats would then need to secure 51 seats to ensure a majority, leaving no room for error. Now, let's go through the safe Republican states. The first solid red state here is Utah, where Republicans nominated Congressman John Curtis to succeed outgoing Senator Mitt Romney. Romney probably would have lost in the primary had he decided to run after voting to impeach Trump twice. Utah hasn't elected a Democrat to the Senate in 50 years. In Wyoming and Nebraska, Republican incumbents John Barrasso and Pete Ricketts are both running for re-election in these solid Trump states. Wyoming voted for Trump by 43 points in 2020, his best performance of any state, while Nebraska backed him by 19 points. The regular election in Nebraska has become unexpectedly competitive, with recent polls showing a tight race between Republican incumbent Deb Fischer and independent Dan Osborne. There has been significant hype around Osborne in Democratic circles, but it's important to note that every single poll showing him leading was sponsored by his campaign. The first and only nonpartisan survey from the New York Times and Siena College shows Fischer leading by 2 points in the likely voter survey. That's still significantly closer than expected, and there's enough uncertainty here to leave the race out of the solid Republican column. However, I wouldn't be surprised if Fischer pulls it out by a solid margin when all is said and done. Moving right along, both North Dakota and Missouri feature one-term incumbents, Kevin Cramer and Josh Hawley, who unseated Democrats in 2018. Cramer defeated Heidi Heitkamp by an 11-point margin, and Hawley defeated Claire McCaskill by 6 points. Both should win second terms by much wider margins, running as incumbents now, and in a presidential year, as North Dakota and Missouri are solid Trump states. In the South, Mississippi and Tennessee have not elected a Democrat to the Senate since the 80s. Republican incumbents Roger Wicker and Marsha Blackburn should keep it that way. In the Midwest, Indiana's Republican Congressman Jim Banks is almost certain to succeed outgoing incumbent Mike Braun, who chose to run for governor instead of re-election. Indiana voted for Trump by 16 points in 2020, and Democrats aren't seriously contesting this seat here in 2024. Finally, in deep red West Virginia, incumbent Democrat Senator Joe Manchin's retirement all but secured this GOP flip. Republicans nominated popular sitting Governor Jim Justice as their nominee, which should lead to a 30 to 40-point win for him come November. This brings the Republican total up to 47 seats, 3 shy of a majority with a Trump win and 4 shy with a Trump loss. As mentioned at the start, Democrats face the difficult task of defending 8 of the remaining 10 competitive seats, including 2 in Trump-won states, Montana and Ohio, and 5 more in states that Joe Biden won by less than 3 percentage points in 2020, Nevada, Arizona, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. The only Republican-held seats remaining are in Texas and Florida, which are the only semi-plausible opportunities for Democrats to go on offense while they play defense in as many states as possible. It's important to remember that these Senate races are being held simultaneously with the presidential election, making it highly likely that split-ticket voting will decline further from the already record lows we've seen in recent elections. In 2020, for example, just 3 of 34 Senate candidates overperformed their party's presidential candidate by more than 10 points. And there are currently just 5 senators representing states won by the other party in 2020. One of those is Republican Susan Collins of Maine, the only senator elected in a state simultaneously won by the other party's presidential candidate since 2012. Considering how many seats Democrats must defend in competitive states, this trend makes their prospects of maintaining their already narrow 51 to 49 seat majority incredibly slim. As discussed earlier, Nebraska's regular election falls into the likely Republican category for incumbent Deb Fischer. The prediction market still places her as a heavy favorite with odds at minus 300. The simple fact remains that Nebraska is a ruby-red state at the federal level, and it's highly unlikely that Fischer underperforms Trump by more than 15 points, which is what the independent Osborne would need to even get close. As for our 2 remaining Republican-held seats, Texas and Florida, I recently downgraded my ratings in both states from likely Republican to lean Republican, and I'm sticking to that for now. Although they do seem to be trending back towards likely, rather than becoming more competitive at this point. In Florida, incumbent Republican Senator Rick Scott was first elected in 2018 by the narrowest of margins, 50.1% to 49.9%, with a raw vote margin of about 10,000 out of more than 8 million cast across the state. He is expected to win by a more comfortable margin this November, after Florida has trended hard to the right since then. Donald Trump notably increased his margin in the state between 2016 and 2020, one of only 5 states where that happened. In the 2022 midterms, Governor Ron DeSantis was re-elected by a whopping 19 points, while Senator Marco Rubio won by 16 points, both impressive landslides by Florida standards. Polling shows Scott consistently leading his Democratic opponent, former Congresswoman Debbie Mucarsel-Powell. However, the average margin has shrunk to just 5 points, with 3 straight polls showing his margin at less than 4 points. This suggests Scott is on track to underperform Trump in Florida. The former president leads by an impressive and growing 8-point margin right now. Scott isn't quite as unpopular as Ted Cruz is in Texas, but it wouldn't surprise me if he does underperform Trump by several points. Speaking of Cruz, you either love him or hate him. He had a close call back in 2018, winning re-election by less than 3 points against popular Democrat Beto O'Rourke. He now faces another Democratic congressman in Colin Allred, who hasn't quite captured the same magic as Beto did, nor the funding for that matter. Nevertheless, the polls have gotten a bit closer, with Cruz up by only around 4 points at this point. Ultimately, in both Texas and Florida, the incumbents should be able to ride Trump's coattails to decent victory margins. Together, they lift the Republican seat total to 50, which would be enough to flip the majority should Trump also flip the White House. But even if Harris wins, the GOP only needs to win one of the remaining 7 seats still up for grabs, including Montana, which Trump carried by more than 15 points in both of his previous campaigns. It is far and away the most difficult seat for Democrats to hold, apart from West Virginia. Of course, there have been signals from the party that it may already be out of reach here, as they've started redirecting funds to try and flip Texas and Florida as a last-ditch attempt to hit 50 seats. Democrats' only saving grace in Montana is the fact that 3-term incumbent Democrat Jon Tester is running to serve a 4th, and he is one of the most popular senators in the country. Yet again, with it being a presidential year, and Tester having never won a race by more than 5 points, you can see why this is a prime pickup opportunity for the Republican Party. They nominated retired Navy SEAL turned businessman Tim Shaihy, an unproven candidate compared to some of the Republican nominees of the last few cycles, which makes things even more difficult for Tester. With 2 months to go until Election Day, Shaihy leads by 6.5 percentage points on average across the last 6 polls in Montana since the start of August. The simple fact here remains that Tester likely needs to outperform Harris by close to 20 points. He did notably outperform Barack Obama by 18 points in 2012, but again, it is becoming harder and harder to do with every passing cycle. I have Montana down as lean Republican here, trending towards likely territory, which brings Republicans up to a presidential race-proof majority with 51 seats. As for the 6 states remaining, they're all much more in reach for Democrats at this point. Their best bet at this point is in Arizona. The incumbent Kirsten Sinema opted against seeking another term as an independent, setting up a head-to-head race between Democratic Congressman Ruben Guo and 2022 Republican nominee for Governor Kari Lake. It's a race in which Democrats have to feel good about given the polling. Guo currently leads by an average of 6 points according to the latest 6 polls, which range from Guo +4 to Guo +9. While that's a pretty wide range of results, the consistent takeaway is that Lake has not led in a single poll dating all the way back to January. Democrats also currently enjoy a winning streak in Arizona. Joe Biden flipped the state blue in 2020, marking the first Democratic presidential win there since 1996. In addition, Democratic candidates have won the 2018 and 2020 U.S. Senate races, as well as the 2022 gubernatorial and U.S. Senate contests. Given this trend and Guo's current polling advantage, I'm placing Arizona in the lean Democrat category. Sticking in the Southwest, up in Nevada, again it's hard to overlook how well the incumbent Jackie Rosen is performing in the polls right now. She leads by an average of more than 4 points, according to Real Clear Politics' average of the last 5 polls. Rosen's margin has narrowed quite a bit over the last couple of weeks, a concerning trend when considering how well Republicans are performing in the early vote in Nevada right now. It's not as if the Republican nominee Sam Brown is a weak candidate. He's a U.S. Army veteran with no significant scandals, and Nevada has generally been trending to the right in recent election cycles. Thus, I still think there's a growing chance Brown could pull off a remarkable comeback. But for now, I think it's probably too little too late here, as Nevada also leans blue. Let's now shift our focus to the Great Lakes region, where we have 4 closely contested Senate races, including the key battleground states of Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, often referred to as the WIMP trio. These are 3 of the most crucial states on the presidential electoral map. Starting in Wisconsin, 2-term incumbent Democrat Tammy Baldwin is seeking a 3rd term. She was comfortably re-elected in 2018 by an 11-point margin, but Wisconsin is notoriously competitive in presidential years. In fact, 4 of the last 6 presidential elections in Wisconsin have been decided by less than a point, including both of the last 2. Trump carried Wisconsin by 0.7% in 2016, and then Biden flipped it back by just 0.6% in 2020. So while Baldwin, like Jackie Rosen in Nevada, enjoys a fundamental advantage as a reasonably popular incumbent, her performance will still be closely tied to Harris's performance at the top of the ticket. Baldwin had also consistently led her Republican challenger Eric Have by a strong margin up until recently. The average has dipped down to just a single percentage point now, and for the first time all cycle, we see a Republican lead in one of these polls. Still, so long as Harris can stick within a point or 2 of Trump, Baldwin holds a slight edge here as Wisconsin tilts blue. Next is Michigan. 4-term incumbent Democrat Debbie Stabenow is retiring, leaving Democrats more vulnerable in another key presidential battleground. This will be the first open race for this Senate seat since 1994, which happens to also be the last time Republicans won a Michigan Senate race. Joe Biden carried Michigan by almost 3 percentage points in the 2020 presidential election, and Democrats currently control both U.S. Senate seats and all statewide offices. That fundamental edge, plus the fact that Democratic nominee Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin has a history of overperforming fundamentals in past House races, does give the party an edge here over Republican nominee former Congressman Mike Rogers. Slotkin has a massive fundraising advantage, and that is translated to another polling edge as well. She leads by about 3% here in the Real Clear average of the last 9 polls in Michigan. Like in Wisconsin, this gap has narrowed, but we've still only seen 1 poll show the Republican candidate out in front. I'm also downgrading it from lean blue here, but Democrats maintain a slight edge. Ultimately, in Pennsylvania, incumbent Democrat Bob Casey Jr. is a powerhouse. He has won 6 consecutive statewide elections in the Keystone State dating back to 1996, when he was first elected as state auditor. Casey was first elected to the U.S. Senate in 2006, defeating then-incumbent Republican Senator Rick Santorum by 18%, the largest margin ever for a Democratic Senate nominee in Pennsylvania's history. He then went on to win re-election by 9 points in 2012 and an even larger 12 points in 2018. Given Casey's track record, while Pennsylvania is arguably the most important state in the presidential race between Trump and Harris, the Senate race has generally been seen as less competitive. Casey is expected to run several points ahead of Harris, who herself is unlikely to lose Pennsylvania by more than a point or two. Yet in terms of polling, yet again we see the Democratic margin shrinking considerably, down to just about a point and a half here based on the last 8 surveys in Pennsylvania. And again, we've only seen one poll show McCormick in the lead throughout the entire cycle. Some remarkable similarities here between these races, and so it fits that I'll also place Pennsylvania down as tilt blue. That brings us to Ohio, another key pickup opportunity for Republicans and one of the 3 Democrat-held Trump-won states. Incumbent Democrat Sherrod Brown has a slightly easier task here compared to Jon Tester in Montana, as Trump carried Ohio by a narrower margin of 8 points in 2020 and currently leads Harris by only 7 points in the presidential poll average. There are some signs that the Democratic decline in Ohio may be slowing, but it's worth recalling the 2022 Senate race. Democratic nominee Tim Ryan, widely viewed as an ideal candidate for Ohio, a moderate, well-liked figure, was expected to make a strong run in the open seat contest, following Republican Rob Portman's retirement. Despite his appeal, Ryan still lost by 6 points to J.D. Vance, who is now Trump's running mate. Now here in 2024, Brown has long thrived on his ability to attract cross-party support, but the key question now is whether Republican-leaning voters who like Brown personally will continue to support him or opt for their preferred national party, especially with Trump at the top of the ticket. Car dealership owner Bernie Moreno claimed victory in the closely contested Republican primary thanks to Trump's endorsement. Most analysts viewed Moreno as the weakest general election candidate for Republicans, and he has trailed Sherrod Brown in almost every head-to-head poll. Brown's current advantage sits at exactly a point based on the last 4 polls, so the race is firmly within the margin of error according to the polls. Yet it's important to note that polling in Ohio has consistently underestimated Republicans in statewide races since 2016. Trump outperformed the 538 averages by 6 points in 2016 and by 8 points in 2020, and Tim Ryan led J.D. Vance for much of the 2022 Senate race before ultimately losing. I tend to be skeptical of candidates' split-ticket abilities these days, which is why I have Ohio tilting toward Moreno and the Republican Party at the moment. For what it's worth, the betting markets reflect a similar outlook. BetOnline currently has Moreno favored at -80 odds. So with flips in Ohio, Montana, and West Virginia, the final projected Republican seat count is 52, with Democrats losing control at 48 seats. I'd love to hear your opinions on this map, so don't hesitate to leave your comments below. I value all feedback, whether it's positive or constructive. Also, let me know what other 2024 related topics you're interested in for future videos. That's a wrap for today's content. If you liked what you saw, please give it a thumbs up. You can explore more of my channel's content here. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll catch you next time.